Hey guys, hope y'all are well. Once again, miss seeing you. Hope everything's going well and you and your family are being blessed. I want to share this lesson on the life of Christ, part 1, the life of Christ. So you'll go through your notes and you'll find that this is series 3, lecture 2. It's series 3, lecture 2, and it's the life of Christ, part 1. And I'm just going to be calling out the answers and going through this on the fill in the blanks. You can write those in. Some of them I may be sharing with you how to spell the word, so you'll have it correctly. But if I don't share on some of those, just you can look it up later or just spell it the best that you can. But I'll be trying to share with you the spelling on the words on some of these. So. All right, so let's start with this. In order to better understand the life and ministry of the incarnate Christ, let us understand the location and culture of the ministry of Christ. So let's look at some things that Jesus was involved with his location and the language during that time. It gives us a better understanding of things so much different than the Western world in which we live in, and the mindset is different. So let's look at some of the things that were going on during the life and ministry of Christ. So, number 1, Palestine. The names of, so here's the different names that were given among the region at this time. Number 1, Canaan. From Genesis 16:3, it was named after Canaan, the son of Ham. Number 2, that fill in the blank is Israel. You're probably familiar with that, Israel. It's named after Jacob, the father of the 12 tribes. If you remember, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then Jacob's name was actually changed to Israel, and so this is where this came from. Number 3, the Holy Land. You've probably heard of it. That is the Holy Land. Number 4, the Pleasant Land, from Zechariah 7:14. The Pleasant Land. Number 5 is the Land of Promise. That's the Land of Promise. You've probably heard of it as being the Promised Land. Number 6, obviously Palestine, from 50 AD to 1948 AD. And then 7, it was known as the State of Israel. This is when Israel was declared, when their independence was in 1948, and where it was known as Israel. They were finally able to get their declaration, their independence, State of Israel. So B, location. Location. Palestine is centrally located in one of the world's largest land masses, even called the center of the world. It became a crossroads of the ancient world of trade and conquest. C, size. Its length is about 150 miles. Width is 50 miles, and border varied in the past. D is climate. It varies from cold. It would be some snow in Jerusalem to semi-tropical. Citrus was grown in Jericho, so you can see with a variety of size and the different locations, it was a difference in the climate that was there. E is physical division. So number 1 is the Phoenician Plain. The Phoenician Plain. So some of you are probably looking at, how do you spell that? So that is P-H-O-E-N-I-C-I-A-N. It's the Phoenician Plain. That was running north from Mount Carmel about 2 or 3 miles. Number 2 is the Plain of Esdraelon, and that is E-S-D-R-A-E-L-O-N. It was also known as Megiddo, Jezreel, Armageddon. It's about 30 miles wide. And when you get into when we get into the teachings on eschatology, you'll hear more about this area right here. From Revelation 16:16, they gathered them together into the place called in Hebrew Armageddon. You may have heard that word Armageddon, and where that's to take place in the Megiddo Valley. We'll be studying and learning all about that when we get to the second semester in eschatology. Number 3, the plain of Sharon. Number 4, the plain of Philistia. Number 5, the Shephelah foothills. Number 6, the mountain range. Highest peaks are in Upper Galilee. That's Galilee, that fill in the blank, approximately 4,000 feet. Number 7 is the Jordan Valley. It's 5 to 20 miles wide, mostly below sea level. Number 8 is 3 seas. That's seas, S-E-A-S. The 3 seas connected by the Jordan River. And it was these 3. It was the waters of Merom. That's M-E-R-O-M. M-E-R-O-M. That was 7 feet above sea level. B is the Sea of Galilee. And then C, one that you're probably familiar with, is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea. It has no outlet. It's very salty. No life. It's 45 miles long, 10 miles wide, 1,300 feet below sea level. And that's where the water's poured into this place. It's called the Dead Sea. I've actually been there before. It's very interesting. It's so salty, and just the density of it that you actually get out there on no float. You can just lay back, and you'll just float in the Dead Sea. Number 9 is, these are some noted mountain ranges. A is Mount Hermon. This was the site of Jesus' transfiguration, where he took Peter, James, and John up on the mountain to be transfigured. That was Mount Hermon. B is Mount Carmel. This is where you heard the story in the Old Testament about Elijah confronting the prophets of Baal. That was on Mount Carmel, where he calls fire down from heaven, where Elijah did. C is Mount Moriah. Moriah, that's M-O-R-I-A-H. This was in Jerusalem. It was the site of the Temple of Solomon. So now Mosque of Omar stands there. Now that's what's there currently. D is Mount Nebo. Nebo, N-E-B-O. It's where Moses died and was buried by God. And then E, Mount of Olives, the place of Christ's ascension and his return, is the Mount of Olives, where the Bible speaks of Jesus returning, setting one foot on the Mount of Olives. And F is Mount Quarantania. This was the scene of part of Jesus' temptation, where he was at. That would be Mount Quarantania. Number 10 is, these are some noted cities. You've heard of all of these. A is Bethlehem. A is Bethlehem. It's Christ's birthplace. It was 6 miles south of Jerusalem. B is Nazareth. This was Jesus' home for 28 years. This is where he was known as Jesus of Nazareth, this is where he spent most of his time growing up. C is Capernaum. It's now desolate, but it was Capernaum. And then D, Jerusalem, where Jesus was crucified. You just see there in Jerusalem. Okay, Roman number 2. People of Israel during Christ's incarnation. So let's talk about the government and who was kind of leading and the officials at that time. A, government. The ruling family was the Herod family. The Herod family. I'm sure you've probably heard of that. Herod, H-E-R-O-D, the family. But there were different ones of Herod, different men. So number 1 is Herod Antipater. Antipater. That is A-N-T-I-P-A-T-E-R. And this was the father of Herod the Great. He ruled over the Jews for several years before 40 B.C. Number 2 was Herod the Great. Herod the Great. Now, he was from 40 B.C. to 4 B.C. He slew the male children in an attempt to kill the baby Jesus. So when you read about the one where Herod the Great was trying to destroy all the males that were young, the babies, and there was a great slaughter during the birth of Jesus while Mary and Joseph had to flee and get out of that region. This was Herod the Great. And number 3, Herod Antipas, A-N-T-I-P-A-S, Herod Antipas. And number 4 is Herod Agrippa the First, number 1. That's Agrippa's A-G-R-I-P-P-A. And so this is Agrippa 1. And then we read about him from Acts chapter 12. And then over in the next page, number 5, is Agrippa the second. Agrippa the second. And you can read about him in Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26. And then so you go on over a couple of pages. We'll get into read all about that Agrippa the second from the book of Acts there. Now turn over in your notes to B, the language of the Jews. The language of the Jews. What did they speak? Number 1, Hebrew was the language of the Israelites before the 70-year captivity in Babylon. So when we talk about from the Old to New Testament, the Old Testament was, it's the Hebrew. So they spoke Hebrew until the 70-year captivity in Babylon. It was read in the synagogues in Jesus' day, but usually it needed an interpreter. It was reserved for sacred moments, that Hebrew. So number 2, the fill-in is Aramaic. Aramaic. That is A-R-A-M-A-I-C. That's Aramaic. This was the language spoken by Jesus and was brought back from Babylon. That was Aramaic. Number 3, Greek was the universal language in Jesus' day. So we have the Old Testament, the Hebrew, and when you're looking things up in the New Testament, you look up, you want to know what is the Greek definition or translation of that word. And 4, Latin was the official language of the Roman government, and that was Latin. C, the religious rules. So how was the religious sect ruled? Who governed? How did it appear and was controlled then? So a 70-member council was called the Sanhedrin. So they would be the ruling body of the religious institution. That's fill in the blank is Sanhedrin. S-A-N-H-E-D-R-I-N. That's S-A-N-H-E-D-R-I-N. It's called the Sanhedrin. And it consisted of 3 groups: Sadducees, Pharisees, elders, and a high priest, which usually that high priest came out of the Sadducee group. So let's look at these and what they each believed, because you read sometime in the teachings of Jesus, and there was a group of Pharisees there, or there was a group of Sadducees there, and they were different religious groups and institutions. So what did they believe, and why did it matter what Jesus was teaching to them when it would specify a Pharisee or a Sadducee? Let's look. So number 1, Pharisees. They believed in immortality and the resurrection. That's the fill in the blank, resurrection. They believed in demons and angels. They also believed in Moses' law and tradition. So they really held strict to the law. They were strictly by the law. B, they had influence as far back as 135 BC, according to Josephus. They believed in the Messianic, M-E-S-S-I-A-N-I-C. They believed in the Messianic, that God would send the Messiah. He would sit upon the throne in Israel, that there would be no sin in the land while he was there in their midst. D, could not even live up to their own standards, good works done for man to see. That's what they would, they would like to pray long prayers for people to notice them, and they were trying to live up, to be good and keep all the laws, and oftentimes they couldn't keep it themselves. And obviously, as we know, no man can. No man could live up to the standards of righteousness for God. That's why we needed Jesus Christ to come and do that for us, so that He did it for us. And when we believe and accept Him and get cleansed through the washing away of our sins because of the blood of Jesus, then we are made righteous, and it only comes through Jesus Christ. And then E, called son of those who had slain the prophets. And you read that from Matthew chapter 23, verses 29 through 36. The second group is the Sadducees. If you look at them, in number 2, Sadducees, they did not believe in the resurrection nor in the spirit world. And I tell people that's why they were called Sadducees. They were sad, you see. They did not believe in the resurrection. They did not believe that God controlled, that fill in the word is controlled, that blank is controlled history. They had great influence in the Sanhedrin, as I said earlier, that most of the Sanhedrin was made up. The high priest was usually from this group of the Sadducees. C, did not believe in any future judgment. Indeed, they did not believe that God would ever interfere in the lives of men. Okay, the third group is called the Essenes. This communistic cult was not mentioned in the New Testament. Pharisees believed that order could be restored with careful organization, education, that's your fill in the blank, education, and discipline. Essenes believe that society is beyond reform and its members withdraw from society to prepare for God's judgment to fall. So A, separated themselves from all outsiders, those who had not went through their rites of initiation, acute discipline, and doctrines. B, the Dead Sea Scrolls have revealed much about them. They preferred to call themselves the Brethren in White. That was what they were known as. And we know that from the beginning of the finding the certain of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the cave of Qumran in 1947 that we started learning so much about other things. C, many have accused Jesus of being a member of this sect. They were accusing Jesus of being a member of the Essenes. For example, but we know that in Christ's teaching it went totally contrary to what this group would even believe. And here's an example. Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 12, verse 11, then Jesus said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So, if a man's sheep were to fall into a ditch on the Sabbath day, it should be pulled out, is what Jesus was teaching. So the teaching of the Essenes was that neither man nor animals should be helped on the Sabbath. So if we know that that's what the Essenes taught, and Jesus was teaching something contrary, that if somebody needs help on the Sabbath, that you help them on the Sabbath. Even though that it's the Sabbath, you can do work to try to help an animal or somebody. So Jesus' teaching was contrary to what the Essenes believed, so he was not a part of that cultic group. D, some believe John the Baptist to be influenced by this sect because of this wilderness dwelling and his practice of baptism, which indicated an association with this sect. So some of their beliefs. Number one, angels' role in last war would be greater than even Messiah. Two, they believed that members of their sect would obtain immortality. And then the fill in the blank is resurrection for righteous by annihilation of wicked. Three, they were celibate, although some women and children are recorded as a part. Four, they believed salvation, that fill in the blank for you is salvation, was attainable by keeping the laws and membership of the sect. Their duty was to hate all outsiders. Five, many dippings at baptism. John dipped only once. 6, they had communal meals, housing, and work. And 7, they believed in constant study of theology. 1/10 of members preaching and studying 24 hours a day. So that's on the Essenes. Now D, the religious enemies of Jesus. So what were the religious enemies? You remember that Jesus' struggle that he had was not with the sinners. It was not from the people that were the outcasts from the religious groups. Jesus came to rescue them, and he would be the one that would be ministering to them and calling them and trying to reach out to them, to the poor, the outcast, or the ones that the religious people thought were the sinners. Those are the ones that Jesus would try that he was reaching out to, but he did oppose and have a problem with the religious leaders, those with a spirit of religion, who thought that righteousness or relationship or fellowship with God came through things that they did, through works or keeping of things and trying to obtain righteousness through the things that they did. It all had to do with selfish things, things that they could do. But Jesus would reach out to these that others wouldn't have anything to do with. And Jesus, that's why he said, I came not to call the righteous, but I came to call sinners to repentance. Jesus said one time, they that are whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. And aren't you so thankful that Jesus Christ came to save and rescue all of us when we were all in sin, without a hope, nothing we could do of ourselves to obtain salvation, but Jesus Christ did it himself for us. And our work is to believe upon what Jesus did for us and receive him into our life. So D, religious enemies of Jesus. Number one, the Sadducees. The Sadducees, remember, they don't believe in the resurrection. Oh, they're so sad, you see. They opposed him. The Sadducees opposed him because he taught the resurrection of the dead. Jesus taught the resurrection of the dead, and he made sure that when the Sadducees were around oftentimes when he would speak about the resurrection of the dead. And then number two was the Pharisees. They opposed him because of his lowly origin. Jesus sat with the publicans, the tax collectors, as I said, and the sinners. He claimed to be the Son of God, and he rejected the traditions, and he exposed the Pharisees' hypocrisy. So those were the ones that Jesus had struggles with, the opposition that the religious leaders would always bring. And Jesus was always confronting them and opposing them, teaching them their errors. And then E, the places of worship. Synagogue. That's S-Y-N-O-G-O-G-U-E. The synagogue. S-Y-N, that's A, synagogue. G-O-G-U-E, the synagogue. It means a place of assembly. That's what a synagogue was. So the synagogue, there was no specific dimensions as a tabernacle. If you remember, the tabernacle had specific dimensions that were given to Moses by God about how it was to be built, the tabernacle. The synagogue was set on the highest point in the community. 3, the chest containing the scriptures should face toward Jerusalem. They always wanted it facing that direction where the synagogue was, on the highest place. 4, the law read in Hebrew, translated into Aramaic, and then later the New Testament to Greek. And then number 5, 460 synagogues in Jerusalem alone. 460 synagogues in Jerusalem alone. Every town with 10 Jewish families were allowed a synagogue. So if there were a town there and they had 10 Jewish families, they were allowed what would be considered a synagogue there, a place of worship. So hope that you enjoyed this today on the life of Christ, just some things that were going on in the life and the days of Jesus, and just about the culture during that time, the physical location, the language of that. And so anyway, we look forward to continuing on with these lessons. God bless you is my prayer.